now time for our weekly political segment, Texas Face Off. Joining me this morning is Ed Espinoza, the Executive Director of Progress Texas, and Matt McCoviac, Chairman of the Travis County Republican Party. Good morning to you both.
Good to be here.
So we talked about this a little earlier in the newscast. Really big news out of the House yesterday is they passed a bill to reduce the penalties for possession of small amounts of marijuana. We're talking about 1 ounce or less. It does not decriminalize it. It just reduces the penalty. It's no longer an arrestable offense, things of that nature. Matt, I really want to start with you because this had widespread bipartisan support, and this is actually, or something that goes even further, this is part of the Republican Party's platform.
It is, and just in the last couple hours, we've seen the Lieutenant Governor on the Senate side, Dan Patrick, said that this bill's not going to move forward in the Senate. So I don't think it's going to likely happen before the end of the legislative session. It has been part of the Republican Party platform in Texas, basically very similar to the Right on Crime initiative that the Texas Public Policy Foundation has been pushing. This is part of a criminal justice reform, series of ideas. Is, if you make possession of a small amount of marijuana not something that can be criminally prosecuted, what does that mean for children? Obviously, it would still be illegal for children to possess it, but if you make it easier for it to get in the hands of children, we know that marijuana affects brain development, particularly when you're younger, and so I think that's really the concern. If this is a gateway to legalization of marijuana in Texas, I think that's a non-starter for certainly for the Lieutenant Governor and for a lot of Republicans. So I know people are going to be disappointed with this political decision on the Senate side today. I think they're going to have to just keep trying session after session to chip away.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this, though, is, while it is not a, it does still make it a criminal offense. It's just a Class C misdemeanor, and that's for the first time. Obviously, those penalties could increase, but do you think still non-starter for him?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's got to pass the House and the Senate, and just because the House passed it doesn't mean the Senate will. And obviously, Lieutenant Governor has the ability to decide what bills come to the floor and what bills don't. And we've got 25 days or so left, and so there's limited time, and I think he just doesn't really see this as a priority.
And poll after poll shows that Texans support this. Again, it's in the Republican Party platform.
Yep.
How frustrating is this?
Extremely frustrating. It's really disappointing because, as you mentioned, Texans overwhelmingly support this issue. 62% of Republicans support lessening the penalties for marijuana possession. We're not talking about any marijuana possession. We're talking about 1 ounce or less, so a very small amount here. Now, I don't think it has as much to do with brain development in children. Like, I realize that is an important issue, but you're dealing with the penalty at the time of possession, which then affects somebody in their life moving forward. You want to reduce it to a Class C so that it becomes a ticketable offense instead of an arrestable offense, and that way somebody has a chance to right the ship and go on about their lives without this hanging over their head for the rest of their lives. But we have to start taking a serious look at marijuana policy reform in Texas. The liberal American Civil Liberties Union and the conservative Texas Public Policy Foundation, as Matt mentioned, coalition, both support changes to this issue, and again, so do an overwhelming number of Texans.
And one of the most important Texans, one might say, Governor Greg Abbott, in the gubernatorial debate, he even said himself that he would support changing our current policies on this.
Our politicians have to catch up with the voters on this because the voters are way ahead of them on this issue. Yeah,
that is definitely an interesting thing there that we're gonna have to keep an eye on. The other thing we briefly want to talk to you guys about late last week, we learned that the Secretary of State on Friday reached a settlement over that potential voter fraud list. But his nomination is still hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
Ed, do you still think that Democrats want to see him not be confirmed?
I certainly hope so. And just to recap the issue, what happened was the acting Secretary of State, appointed by Governor Abbott, issued a list in January of a number of people who he suspected might not be citizens and are registered to vote.
95,000.
Nearly 100,000 people. Yeah. That's right. And it came to pass that none of these people were found to be non-citizens that I can recall, but the overwhelming number were based on bad data. This was an attempted voter purge of people who had no reason being on this list in the first place. This was one of the first actions this guy took coming into office. He has now settled a claim out of court with the defendants, with the plaintiffs in this suit for $450,000 over these wrongful actions. Why should that be rewarded with a permanent appointment as the chief voter person in Texas? I don't think it passes muster. I don't think he should be the Secretary of State.
Matt, what do you say? Because the governor is not backing down from his nomination.
No, and look, this original error that was made by the Department of Public Safety, not by the Secretary of State. It was the DPS had the naturalized citizen list, did not provide it to the Secretary of State's office. That's what their mistake was. That's what the governor has said. It's what the Secretary of State has said. So it was a terrible mistake. They worked hard to rectify it. They went in and got with the plaintiffs and were able to find a settlement that all sides could agree to. And they now have a process going forward to ensure that only citizens, that they can maintain the voter list, that only citizens are part of it, and that naturalized citizens obviously are counted as full citizens, as they should be. So I hope that since he went about that in good faith to try to settle that issue, that Democratic senators can take another look at him now. There is still 25 days. I wouldn't count him out yet. I still think there's a chance. The governor cares a lot about this. He's also worked really hard going down to South Texas, meeting with county officials, working with county election officials over the last few months to settle this lawsuit.
You said something, and I know you're jumping to jump back, but I just want to raise the point first, since I'm the non-partial one here.
Yeah.
You know, while yes, everyone has acknowledged this was bad data, it did come from the Secretary of State's office.
The order came from the Secretary of State.
It came from his office, and he talked about things he maybe should have done differently in that. So now I'll let you.
So that's exactly right. The Department of Public Safety issued the data. The data was old data. It was at least 7 years old, which made it bad data. But the order to purge the voter lists came from the Republican-nominated acting Secretary of State. He ordered the counties to purge the lists. He then quietly went back and said that maybe some of this data is bad, instead of publicly correcting it. His actions were then carried by the Attorney General in this state, saying we need to investigate. The President retweeted this, making it look like there was rampant voter fraud in Texas when there was not. These are actions that should not be rewarded with a permanent appointment to the Secretary of State. Well,
so as you mentioned, 25 days, and if he does not get the approval of the Senate in these last days,
his term would end May 27th on the last day of legislative session, and the governor would appoint him to a Secretary of State. Again, I wouldn't count him out yet. I don't think it's an overwhelming going to be confirmed, but I still think there is a chance he's going to work to try to flip a couple senators, and I think he has a better opportunity to do that now that they've settled this lawsuit.